And good morning. Good morning to you all. Welcome to this Studio Offshore Energy event. My name is Bob Meijer. I'll be your host this morning for the coming 30 minutes. And for those of you who are not familiar with the format of TKI, Studio Offshore Energy, normally we present here the results of research and innovation projects. And in this case, we will present the results of a study that we have called Flattening the Curve. And this may sound a bit cryptic, but of course we'll explain what it is about. It is about the demand and supply curve of offshore energy, offshore wind energy on one hand, and the industrial use of electricity on the other hand. And this study was commissioned by TKI Energy and Industry, together with TKI Offshore Energy, both part of the top sector energy. And the study was performed by Berenschot and Kalavasta. And the program for today is that we first have Bart Visser from Kalavasta presenting the report. And that's followed then by a reflection by André Kraans from the NWEA, the Netherlands Wind Energy Association, and another reflection from Rob Kreiter, who is director of TKI Energy and Industry. And given the fact that we only have 30 minutes for this, a lot of content, I really like to give the floor to Bart Visser. Bart, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I'll share my screen in a second. Then I'll try to explain the study Flattening the Curve within 10 minutes. So as Bob explained, Kalavasta and Berenschot together worked on a study called Flattening the Curve. Get to the next slide. And at the basis of this study lie three research questions. The first question is, how can we flatten the production curve of offshore wind? And the second one, how can we shape the industrial demand curve? And then the third question, how can we bridge these curves? So how can we bring the demand curve of industry closer together with the offshore generation curve? And how can we do that while minimizing system costs? And what are the required policy measures to obtain this? So before I go into the details of what we analyzed, I will first explain the concepts of flattening the curve. And in this figure, you see the production curve of offshore wind and the demand curve of industry. At the left side, the hours with the production, where the production of offshore wind are the highest, are displayed, and it is sorted such that at the right side you see the hours with the least production. For the industrial demand curve, we simplified and we assumed the curve to be constant throughout the year. And what comes up here is now a gap between production and demand. And bridging this gap, closing this gap, is what we call flattening the curve. Before I go into the analysis that we performed, I will first talk about the limited scope of the study, because the analysis can be very complex, and to reduce this complexity, we together with TKI, Offshore Energy and Industry decided to limit the scope, and the scope is displayed in the figure below. So it contains the offshore energy production, such as offshore wind farms, but also offshore solar PV. It contains offshore infrastructure, hydrogen imports, and the industrial hydrogen and electricity demand based on three scenarios for the year 2050. What then lies outside of the scope is the energy infrastructure on land, the electricity imports, other demand sectors such as built environment or mobility, other energy carriers, and renewable production on land. Now I will go into an overview of the results. What you see here is a table containing all the policy or all the technologies that can help to flatten the curve. And while all these technologies do in fact help flatten the curve, not all do so while minimizing system costs. Some options lead to increased system costs, and these are the red minuses, and some leads to improved system costs, so lower total system costs, which is a green plus. There are 6 options that we analyzed, and the first and the fourth I will go into more detail in the next slides. But the others I will explain briefly here. So we looked at hybrid heat, And of course, hybrid heat can help flatten the curve as it can absorb surpluses of renewables. And when you use cheap hybrid heat technologies, such as boilers, it does so at decreased system costs. However, there's also an option to use more expensive industrial furnaces, for example, in the chemical industry. If you use that for a hybrid heating system, the cost decreases of hybrid heating is nullified by the high capex of the furnaces. This can be circumvented if you use existing furnaces and use lifetime extensions, for example. Then over to offshore solar PV. Placing offshore solar PV next to wind parks has a synergy, and the total production profile will be more constant than only offshore wind. And this way, it has a higher utilization rate of the offshore infrastructure. However, the additional capex of offshore solar PV systems nullifies these system gains. So in total, the effects on system costs are negligible. However, it's important to note that we are looking at the year 2050. So we made cost assumptions for 2050, which are surrounded with a lot of uncertainty. So changing these cost assumptions can also heavily impact the conclusions of this report. Then over to thermal buffering. Thermal buffering really helps in flattening the curve, and it can do so at decreased system costs when you use cheap power-to-heat technologies, such as an e-boiler. However, if you use more expensive power-to-heat technologies, such as heat pumps, it actually increases system costs. And then finally, for electricity storage, batteries do not decrease system costs when only the needs of the industry are considered. However, it goes without saying that if you use existing battery storage, which is already available in the system, for example, in electric vehicles, it can help reducing system costs. Now I will go into a deep dive, and I will start with power to hydrogen. We investigated 3 power to hydrogen concepts, and they are displayed here in these 3 figures on the screen. The first concept is onshore power to hydrogen. The second one is offshore dedicated power to hydrogen, which means that all electricity of a wind farm is directly converted into hydrogen, and hydrogen is then transported to shore. The third design concept is a hybrid power to hydrogen solution, where a part of the electricity is used for producing hydrogen when there is a surplus, and this hydrogen is then transported via pipelines. But if there isn't a surplus of renewables and it can be used directly as baseload, it's transported to shore via electricity cables. The first and the third design concepts were very comparable regarding system costs. But the second design concept actually had much higher system costs. And this can be counterintuitive because the infrastructure costs of hydrogen pipelines is much lower than electricity cables. However, the second solution comes with efficiency losses. Excuse me. Because if you don't use your directly produced electricity for your baseload demands have to be filled in elsewhere, which is often done using backup power plants. And the losses of these backup power plants actually reduce system efficiency, which overall leads to higher system costs. The second technology that I want to go into more detail about is industrial production reduction. So industrial production reduction is basically an industrial site or a sector temporarily reducing production in order to reduce electricity demand when there is not a lot of renewable electricity available. This figure gives an overview of the residual demand of industry, which is actually the baseload of industry minus the renewable energy production. So it's the remaining electricity demand which has to be met using other means. One option of meeting this demand is by building backup capacity, for example, hydrogen to power plants, and using hydrogen to generate electricity. Another option is to temporarily reduce the industrial demand so that less of this backup capacity is required. However, this also comes at a cost because industries temporarily reduce less products and have less revenue. And cost data for this option is not available widely. So we came up with a newly developed calculation method in which we estimated the marginal costs of industrial production reduction given a certain scenario. And what we concluded is that for some industries, it's more cost effective to temporarily reduce electricity demand a few times a year instead of building backup capacity. However, for the industries which reduce production at a higher expense, it is often more cost effective to just build additional backup power instead of cutting back production with high costs many times a year. So there is a break-off point where it becomes more effective to just build backup power capacity. Then based on these conclusions, we came up with 3 policy recommendations. And the first one being to develop a fitting pricing mechanism for backup power plants. The second one is to ensure that the majority of offshore wind tenders is at least partially connected to shore via offshore electricity infrastructure. And the third one is to focus research and innovation on power-to-gas backup solutions, because it turns out to be an indispensable option of meeting demands in every scenario that we analyzed. Thank you for your attention, and I will give it back over to you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's a very interesting presentation that you gave. It also gives rise to some questions. In the chat, I saw 2 questions related to system cost. What is your definition of system cost, Bart?
Yes. So the system cost is the annualized capital expenditures. So it's the capex combined with the lifetime and the cost of capital, operational costs. And then because we have a closed system where only hydrogen is imported, in this case, we also take into account the cost of hydrogen imports. And these together, yeah, they come up to a certain number. And if you add in solar PV technology, for example, the amount of full load hours of your electrolyzers, they go up. And then your hydrogen imports go down, and your use of hydrogen backup plants go down. And this all adds up to certain system costs, and it reduces costs, but then you get an additional solar PV capex.
Yeah.
And that's also why we really had to limit the scope of the study, because you can't include the whole country, the whole economy into this cost analysis.
No, and I think that's very clearly represented also in the report. So that's for everybody available to read now. So all those details are in there. And again, thank you very much, Bart. We'll go over to André Kraans from the Netherlands Wind Energy Association for some reflections on the study. André, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Also, thank you for the report and the presentation. That's an important topic, so it's good to see that this getting more attention and this research is being made. And also thank you for the opportunity to give a reflection. And there's a lot to say, and there's also a lot of topics addressed in the report that we have seen. But I will just limit myself to 4 technologies and 3 general remarks. So it's very good to see this hybrid connection to onshore. Happy with that. We also recognize the economic uncertainty of offshore solar PV. Well, the new designs of wind turbines and the medium-term electrical storage that were kind of out of option crossed out in the report. I think that's still something that could be interesting to look into. Now, for the remarks, the report also addresses some misconceptions. And in that perspective, I would like to make a small remark about this first graph we have seen, that concept of flattening the curve of wind energy production and the concept of flat demand. Because for discussing this topic, that's a great illustration. However, if you would look in the real world and you would take this total demand and the total supply, then it will look that different. And it's also this non-flexible demand, and that's our challenge. In the report, there's also said that these backup plants just have very limited hours per year. And so I would say that's the main challenge we have, and that's also a kind of message that we should put outside, or a kind of disclaimer with this graph. And I make this remark because I think today here anybody in the webinar will not think that we still need to solve a kind of 50% energy need, that we don't have energy for 50% of the time. But that, there could be a small risk that people kind of outside this bubble can kind of misunderstood what's happening here and think like, oh, let's have nuclear power plants or something. And that I would like to prevent. Now, the second thing, this type of study is fundamental for system integration. If we look to ourselves as the offshore wind market, and we're aware of system integration. But if you see what we do day-to-day basis, we were very much focused on the next wind farm. We're building everything wind farm by wind farm. And that's also what the government is asking us mainly. So I think this system approach is very useful and very much needed. And finally, there are several studies that say the electricity system needs to be carbon-free in 2035, and the full energy system carbon-free in 2040. And that's a Hercules task. And that also requires a focus on innovation to meet those ambitious goals. So I don't want to exclude any innovation. We need to work on all of them. But at the same time, we need a kind of military focus on those must-have technologies to build the new energy we need so much based on renewables. Well, thank you. That's it. Back to you, Bob.
Yeah, well, thank you for your reflections and thoughts on this, André. And of course, your last remark resonates very well with the TKI activities. Of course, we're an innovation program, and we do feel that innovation can still change a lot of the assumptions that are currently made in the report. But of course, that's still uncertain in a way. But of course, we are working very hard to address those challenges. And I saw that there was another question, Bart, maybe you can handle that. That is also related to the issue of system cost. And the question is, as I would expect, that thermal buffering by heat pumps gives lower infrastructure cost on land, and therefore impacting system cost in an almost in a more positive way than e-boilers would. I'm not sure if it's clear to you.
Yeah. So it's an important omission, the infrastructure on land in the study, and it especially, so that's a good point. It has a larger impact on power to heat technologies such as e-boilers or heat buffering, because these technologies are relatively inexpensive. However, their impact on the grid can potentially, of course, depending on how you operate the system, can potentially lead to significant increases in infrastructure costs. So when taking into account this factor, the results will change. And of course, the infrastructure cost of heat pump with buffering isn't positive, so it's less negative than the ones with e-boilers. So I would not expect the system costs to turn green, but maybe it comes a little bit closer to the e-boilers with the cheap power to heat technology combined with heat buffering.
Of course, you had to make a demarcation to set the system boundary somewhere. Okay, thanks for that clarification. So now I'd like to ask Rob Kreiter from TKI Energy and Industry to give his views on what he's seen from the report. Rob.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. And I'm happy that we reached this point, that we published a study and that we put it out in the open for discussion. To me, this is again another step in getting to a more balanced system, or at least a better coupling between supply and demand, wind and industry. We've been working on that for a couple of years now, realizing that this is the next big thing in the energy system. And well, to me, it's really just another step. There's a lot we have to do. There's a lot we have to clarify still. And one of the things I see in the study is that, well, I think rightly so, industrial flexibility is considered expensive, and it's technically challenging. And luckily, we start seeing technical options being developed. We see, for instance, during the gas crisis, we've seen a lot of industrial plants turn down their production. So technically, there's a lot of potential. Economically, it's challenging, and this is typically where our focus is, right? This is we do the innovations to make things possible technically, but also to make them bankable, to make them in the end economically feasible. So to me, this is just another well, how do you say this? This is just a push in the back for us to run faster and to start developing these options and unlock that potential in the industry. And one of the things that I think is the report actually shows is that the industrial system was never designed to operate in the type of energy system that we now are developing. And the industrial production system was designed for energy production that follows the load. And now we turn that system around, and the industry needs to adapt to that. So I think we just only started developing the system of the future, especially on the industry side. So I see this more as a challenge rather than the description of the end point that we have in the report. It's more for us. It's a call out to run faster, to do more, to really focus our innovation activities on developing that industrial electrification, including the flexibility that is needed.
Yeah, so also innovation from your side is needed there. And what you also said, like discussion. So the report is there. It has got certain assumptions in it. It's very clear in its results, and therefore I think it can trigger a lot of discussion, which is so important to move ahead. And I saw in the chat also questions, and please, I would encourage everybody to raise their questions in the Q&A. If we can't handle them during this webinar, we will come back to you with response. So please continue to raise questions. And there was a question related to offshore hydrogen production, and I also like to pose it to you, Bart. So if you look at the distinction between pure electric, pure hydrogen, and the hybrid solution, you clearly say that the optimal one is the hybrid. Does the fact that you exclude, say, direct use of hydrogen, so not taking the inefficiencies of converting back to electricity into account, does it play a role?
Well, let me correct you there a little, because we conclude that both the option of power to hydrogen on land and the hybrid option are very comparable. And in the system analysis that we do, the direct consumption of hydrogen by industry is automatically included. However, the problem that arises from direct coupling of power to hydrogen offshore is that no matter how much wind capacity you have offshore, there are always hours that the wind doesn't blow as hard, so that not all baseload capacity is covered by offshore power production. And if you then exclude part of your wind parks to be directly coupled to hydrogen, even though there is a direct demand for that hydrogen, then you still have additional hydrogen to power conversion with its losses. So it's not directly related to the direct consumption, but more to the electricity consumption. And there is actually in our system, there's always enough direct consumption, because in every scenario, there is a certain level of hydrogen imports. Yeah. So that actually doesn't play that big of a role in that specific analysis.
So we're always short of hydrogen in the way. Yeah.
Well, within the limits of the scope that we analyze, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe the nuance is also in your statement saying that the majority of the offshore wind farm standard should be at least hybrid or electric, and that there may be room for certain areas that is still would have additional value.
Yes, so we did a generic assumption. So we put the average distance from wind park to shore at 250 kilometers, which is far, but it is imaginable that you have parks that go even further.
Yeah.
Or you can think of situations where it's very impractical to run electricity infrastructure to shore. And well, of course, if you do it only with a few parks, with a few edge cases, then the impact on system cost isn't that drastic. However, if you start doing it, so the direct power to hydrogen on a lot of your wind parks, then you really see this inefficiency effects come up.
Yeah. Yeah, great, by the way, and thanks for all these explanations, Bart. And this, I think, illustrates that there's still, that we need to digest the report further and continue the discussion about this. I'm looking also at Rob and Andre, if you have any further questions or for clarifications or comments that you would like to make before we start moving to rounding off this half an hour studio offshore energy.
No, thanks. Not today.
No, okay. Thanks very much. And I also see that there are no, additional questions in the chat. There may be some things that we'll pick up on later and come back to the audience by mail. Okay, I see now there is one question coming in. Maybe we have a minute for that. It says, in your third option, can be several flavors of hybrid connection. Full hybrid, that is offshore electrolyzer, can have access to fully meshed electricity grid, or offshore electrolyzer only has access to part of the meshed electricity grid. I presume a full meshed hybrid grid was considered in the study. Is that right?
So I think I understand the question. So what we did is that we assumed that because we have a very limited scope and we have complete control over all the parameters, we made the most favorable assumption for the hybrid connection, where there's always just enough electricity infrastructure that's required for connecting to the baseload demand of industry. So the electricity infrastructure is available exactly as it is needed in a sense. And then the offshore wind production that goes above, that's baseload capacity, that is available for the hydrogen electrolyzers. So I don't know if I answered the question fully, but maybe this gives some clarification in the assumptions.
Well, it definitely gives clarification to me. I'm not sure if it's also clear for the person who asked the question. And we may revisit that question in the Q&A later on. So what I'd like to do for now is to thank you, Bart, for your presentation. And thanks, of course, Andre and Rob also for your reflections on the report. So the report is now available. You can find it on the websites of TKI Offshore Energy and TKI Energy and Industry. And I would really advise you to have a good look at it, because there's very interesting material in there, and also food for further discussion. And before I leave you this morning, I would like to point out two new events that we are organizing. The first event is in the Industry and Offshore Wind Festival, an innovation event that looks at presenting results from projects, but also looking forward to new innovation projects and available subsidies for cooperative research and innovation. This is going to be an event that is both for the offshore wind sector and for the industry, but of course also looking at smart combinations of these two. And that event is organized on the 19th of January, and it's in Den Bosch. And also here you can find more information on the websites from Top Sector Energy and the two TKIs that organize this. So a second event that we're organizing is not a physical event, but a webinar. That webinar is on the 13th of February. And that's in our series TKI Offshore Energy Live. That's a webinar of an hour, and that will go into more detail also about the same subject of flattening the curve, but then really looking at the wind farm side, so the generation side, how we can say flatten that part of the curve. We'll go into details, and the subject will be offshore wind on demand. How can we produce energy when it's required and not just electricity when the wind blows? And of course, that would involve many solutions in that area. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your presence and attention for this webinar, and wish you a very good day.